A loving mother drops her children at daycare on a quiet Monday morning in Ireland. By evening, she's gone forever. But here's what makes this case absolutely chilling. The person who took her life wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. It was someone who promised to love and protect her until death do them part. Welcome back to Deep Crime. I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about the people closest to you. North County, Dublin, Ireland. A place so peaceful and quiet that serious crime was practically unheard of. We're talking about a small community of just 400 people, where everyone knows everyone, and the biggest excitement might be the local football match on weekends. The year is 2004, and in this serene setting lived the O'Reilly family. Rachel O'Reilly was 30 years old, a vibrant woman who stood tall at 5'11". She had this infectious energy that everyone noticed. Friends described her as a live wire with a heart of gold. Rachel wasn't just sitting at home. She was actively building connections in her community, selling Avon and Tupperware, getting to know her neighbors. Rachel had married Joe O'Reilly back in 1991 after meeting him at a department store where they both worked. Picture this. Joe was 6'5", and when he first saw Rachel, he was struck by her height. But Rachel wasn't interested initially. Joe had to ask her out multiple times before she finally said yes. Talk about persistence, right? Their love story seemed like something out of a movie. Joe even proposed at the top of the Eiffel Tower. They both played softball and were so good they could have gone professional. They had two beautiful boys, ages 2 and 4, and had just moved into their dream home, a 3-bedroom bungalow called Lamb's View in Knoll. But here's where things get interesting. While everything looked perfect from the outside, those closest to Rachel started noticing cracks in the facade. The day that changed everything. October 4th, 2004. It started like any other Monday. Joe left for work at 5:30 in the morning, heading to his job at Viacom Outdoor Advertising, where he worked as an account manager. Rachel was home with their 2 young sons. Around 10:30 that morning, Joe sent Rachel a text message. "You and the boys sleep okay? Wish Jackie a happy birthday for me, please. Kiss, kiss." Sweet, right? But Rachel never replied. At the time, no one thought much of it. But then something unusual happened. Rachel, who was incredibly punctual and reliable, failed to pick up her son from daycare at 12:30 like she always did. This was completely out of character. Rachel was the type of mother who lived for her children. Everything she did revolved around those boys. When the daycare called Joe at 1:15 p.m. to say Rachel hadn't shown up, he immediately tried calling her. No answer. He called again at 1:24, leaving increasingly worried messages. Still nothing. Joe called his mother-in-law, Rose Callally, Rachel's adoptive mother. Rose knew immediately that something was wrong. This wasn't like Rachel at all. Rose agreed to drive to the house while Joe went to collect the children. When Rose pulled up to the bungalow, she felt a moment of relief. Rachel's car was in the driveway. Maybe everything was fine after all. But as she approached the house, that relief quickly turned to dread. The patio door was open. The house was eerily silent. Rose called out Rachel's name. No response. As she stepped inside, the scene that greeted her was like something from a nightmare. Kitchen drawers were pulled open, items scattered across the floor. In the living room, videos were dumped in a pile. It looked like the house had been ransacked, but nothing could have prepared Rose for what she found next. She made her way to Rachel and Joe's bedroom, and there she discovered her daughter's lifeless body. Rachel was lying on her back in a pool of blood. her body twisted in an unnatural position. The scene was so brutal that Rose couldn't even tell which way her daughter's face was turned. Blood covered the walls, the ceiling, and there was even blood spatter in the bathroom. When Rose touched her daughter, she said Rachel was as cold as marble. Rose's screams could be heard by neighbors. She frantically called the police, then called her son Declan to tell him the horrifying news. Joe arrived at the house at 2:30 p.m. with the children. When Rose told him what she'd found, he ran into the house shouting Rachel's name. When he saw her body, his first words were, "Jesus, Rachel, what did you do?" Now I want you to think about that for a moment. Your wife of 13 years, the mother of your children, is lying there obviously the victim of a violent attack, and your first instinct is to ask what she did? Most people would be asking who did this to her, right? Rachel's best friend Jackie, who was a nurse, came to the house and confirmed there was no pulse. The police arrived shortly after, and when they saw the scene, they immediately knew this was no ordinary burglary gone wrong. Detective Sergeant Pat Murray, now retired, was one of the first investigators on the scene. He had years of experience, but even he was shocked by the brutality of what he saw. He later said, "She was pulverized. Her hair was matted in blood. You could see down to her skull. The poor woman had no chance whatsoever." But here's what immediately caught the investigators' attention. This didn't look like a random attack. Despite the apparent ransacking, there was money left untouched in the house. 800 euros in a box in the kitchen and 400 euros in Rachel's bag. What kind of burglar leaves that much cash behind? The post-mortem results confirmed their suspicions. Rachel had been struck between 6 and 9 times with a heavy object, possibly a dumbbell. Her skull was fractured in 2 places. The defensive wounds on her arms showed she had fought desperately for her life. Blood in her airways meant she would have struggled to breathe as she lay dying. This wasn't a robbery. This was personal. When police questioned Joe that first evening, his story seemed straightforward enough. He said he left for work as normal, went to the gym, then headed to a bus depot in Broadstone, where he was supposed to meet his colleague, Derek Querney. Derek confirmed this, saying he had spoken to Joe on the phone when he arrived at the depot. But then something strange happened during the interview. Detective Pat Murray asked Joe if there was anyone who might have wanted to hurt Rachel, or if perhaps she had been seeing someone else. Joe's response was odd. No, neither of us were having an affair. Murray hadn't asked if Joe was having an affair, so why did he feel the need to clarify that he hadn't been? The truth came out quickly. Joe admitted he had been having a relationship with a woman named Nikki Pelly. He claimed it was just a brief fling, nothing serious, and that it was over. But was it really? The investigation took a dramatic turn when police searched Joe's office and seized his laptop. What they found painted a very different picture of the O'Reilly marriage. Joe had been exchanging emails with his sister Anne, and in these messages, he revealed his true feelings about Rachel. Using vulgar language and expletives, he described how much he hated his wife, even saying she repulsed him. When Rachel's mother, Rose, learned about these emails, she was devastated. She said the family was bereft that any person could be spoken about in such an appalling manner. But the emails revealed something else troubling. Just 4 months before Rachel's death, social services had received an anonymous tip claiming Rachel was unfit to be a mother. The allegations were completely false, but Joe's emails to his sister showed he was pleased about the investigation. He believed that if they divorced, this would help him gain full custody and cut Rachel out of their sons' lives entirely. Joe's behavior after Rachel's death was becoming increasingly bizarre. When police told him he could return to the house to check what had been stolen, he invited Rachel's parents over. Even though the house hadn't been cleaned and still had their daughter's blood everywhere. What happened next was so disturbing that it haunts Rachel's family to this day. Joe began reenacting the murder for them, speculating about how Rachel had been attacked, pointing to the blood spatter on the ceiling. He talked about how he thought the killer had stepped over her body, cleaned up in the bathroom while listening to Rachel choking on her own blood, then gone back to finish her off. Rose later said she could hear Rachel's voice in her head saying, "He did it." Joe also started speaking to journalists, even appearing on television to appeal for information. But his behavior during these interviews raised more red flags. He invited journalists to see the bedroom where Rachel was murdered. One journalist, Jenny Friel, said this took her completely by surprise and made her feel sick. Another journalist said he'd never had an encounter like that in his entire career. Joe began offering what became known as murder tours to friends and community members who came to offer condolences. He would show them the crime scene and explain what he thought had happened. Who does that? The affair exposed. Meanwhile, the truth about Joe's relationship with Nikki Pelly was coming to light. This wasn't a brief fling as he'd claimed. They had been having a serious affair for months. They spoke on the phone every day and met twice a week. Joe would tell Rachel he was away for work, but instead he was with Nikki. The relationship was so serious that in their text messages, Joe would refer to Rachel's children as "our boys" when talking to Nikki. They had been planning a future together. But here's the most chilling part. Nikki later told police that Joe had once said to her, "If I killed Rachel, I could get away with it." At the time, she thought he was joking. Looking back, she wasn't so sure. The case took a major turn when police analyzed Joe's mobile phone data. This was groundbreaking technology for 2004. Using cell tower pings to track someone's movements had never been used to this extent in an Irish murder trial. Remember, Joe claimed he was at the bus depot in Broadstone all morning, but his phone told a different story. The analysis showed that at the crucial time when Rachel was being murdered, Joe's phone was pinging off a tower at Murphy's Quarry, less than a mile from his home. The quarry could even be seen from their house. CCTV footage showed a blue Fiat Maria, the same make and model as Joe's car, passing the quarry multiple times that morning, first heading toward the house, then driving away after the murder. The timeline was devastating for Joe's alibi. At 9 a.m., Rachel left to take the children to daycare. CCTV caught her passing the quarry. At 9:41 a.m., the same camera filmed her returning home. It was believed she was murdered shortly after. Joe's phone data showed he was in the area when Rachel returned home. It was only after the crucial time period that his phone appeared in Broadstone, where he claimed to have been all morning. The phone evidence revealed what investigators believe really happened that morning. Joe had told his colleague via email that his phone would be out of service for most of the morning. This was part of his plan. He knew Rachel's routine. She would drop the kids at daycare and return home by 9:45 a.m. Police believe Joe was waiting in the bedroom when Rachel returned. He attacked her with what was likely a dumbbell from their home gym. One of the items he later claimed was stolen. After the brutal attack, Joe showered to wash off the blood, put his clothes and towels in the washing machine, then tried to make it look like a burglary. He took some items and dumped them in a bag by a stream half a mile away. But Joe made a crucial mistake. When the daycare called to say Rachel hadn't picked up their son, Joe stalled. He spent more time there than necessary. Why? because he needed Rose to be the one to find Rachel's body. He couldn't be the one to discover her. That would look suspicious. The arrest. In October 2006, 2 years after Rachel's murder, police finally had enough evidence. Pat Murray went to Joe's mother's house and placed his hand on Joe's shoulder. "Joe O'Reilly, I'm arresting you for the murder of Rachel O'Reilly." Murray later described the moment. "He turned and faced me. The blood drained from his face and he went white as a sheet. He was not expecting it." Joe entered a plea of not guilty. The trial began in June 2007, and the media attention was unprecedented. Crowds formed every day trying to get into the public gallery. For Rachel's family, seeing Joe again after 8 months was incredibly painful. Her father, Jim, said Joe had a fierce arrogance, while Rose described him as detached. The evidence presented painted a damning picture. The phone triangulation data, the emails insulting Rachel, the lies about his whereabouts, the downplaying of his affair, and his bizarre behavior after the murder. Text messages between Joe and Nikki were read to the court, showing they had planned to start a life together. Joe often told Nikki he loved her and would refer to Rachel's children as "our boy." The prosecution argued that at 9:45 a.m. on October 4th, 2004, Rachel arrived home to find her husband of 13 years waiting for her in the bedroom. He launched his attack, bludgeoning her repeatedly. After killing her, he showered, washed his clothes, staged the burglary scene, and disposed of the stolen items. On July 21, 2007, after 9.5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty of murder. The courtroom erupted. Rachel's family jumped to their feet, punching the air, then breaking down in tears. Supporters cheered as Joe O'Reilly was taken away to begin his life sentence. Rose Callally spoke outside the court. "At long last, we've got justice for our darling Rachel."
Thank everybody, the police in particular. They have been so brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And the prosecution team and all the people of Ireland that have been behind us with cards, letters, prayers. It all meant so much to us. And at long last, we've got justice for our darling Rachel.
Joe O'Reilly has attempted multiple appeals, all unsuccessful. He's been refused parole at least 3 times. Rachel's family continues to fight to ensure he remains in prison. For years, Nikki Pelly stood by Joe, visiting him weekly in prison and maintaining his innocence. They finally ended their relationship in 2022. More tragedy struck the Callally family in 2010 when Rachel's sister Anne passed away from cancer at just 31 years old. Rose said Anne was deeply affected by Rachel's murder, living in constant fear and never feeling safe. Rose published a book about her daughter's case called Remembering Rachel. She said, "I don't want anyone to ever forget what was done to Rachel." But Rose wants Rachel remembered for who she was, a bubbly, loving person who touched everyone's hearts in her short time on Earth. The tragedy of Rachel O'Reilly's case isn't just that a young mother was brutally taken from her children. It's that she was killed by the one person who should have protected her above all others. Final thoughts. This case reminds us that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes it comes from the person sleeping next to you, the person you trust with your life, the person who promised to love you forever. Joe O'Reilly's mask of being a devoted family man hid a cold, calculating individual capable of unthinkable violence. His elaborate plan, his manipulation of evidence, his performance for the media, It all points to someone who believed he was smarter than everyone else. But in the end, technology caught up with him. The same phone he used to coordinate his affair became the key evidence that put him away for life. Rachel's story is a reminder to trust our instincts. Rose knew something was wrong from the very beginning. Her mother's intuition told her that Joe was responsible, even when everyone else said grief makes people act strangely. That wraps up another case here on Deep Crime. If you found this story as compelling as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into criminal cases that shocked the world. And remember, sometimes the truth is stranger and more terrifying than any fiction. Until next time, stay safe out there.